Color is a design element and needs to be treated as a design element. So for example, when you're kind of thinking about your design and you want to make one of the areas in the design have more emphasis than another area, a great way to do that is to change the color. Even slight color changes can do that, as illustrated here. Instead of looking at that giant green rectangle, our eye kind of goes to that tiny little yellow rectangle first. Kind of moving forward here, you see that in fine art too, where most of the painting is blue, but then there's a spark of red, and that really creates that focal point. So, like I said, color can be used sparingly, it can be used in large amounts, and then there's also uh, cool colors and warm colors. Warm colors kind of stimulate um, certain emotions, and then cool colors simulate certain color emotions in us. And so this appeals to kind of our feelings, our personal memories, our cultural associations, and can affect the way we're affected by color. Wayne Thiebaud used color as balance in this painting. This is a great example of using color to kind of create visual balance. If you notice, the face of the rabbit is kind of where your eye wants to go, and that's just kind of intuitive and natural. We want to look at the expression of a human, for example, or an animal. We like to look at eyes, we like to look at mouths and expressions. And so that's where all the weight would be if Wayne Thiebaud had not put this dark blue, intense shadow at the back of the rabbit. And because the shadow is here, it kind of balances out the artwork so that not all of the visual weight is on one side. So color can be used to emphasize, it can also be used to balance. And you can see it here as well. So if you look at these kind of forlorn, dark figures on one side of the painting, that's where your eye wants to go. That's what you want to look at. But then these kind of bold, strong colors and shapes on the other side kind of balance it out and create kind of a place for our eye to go after we look at the figures. So it's kind of creating a lot more um, energy on that other side of the page. If that was more muted, I think our eye would be really focused on the expressions and faces. So color can be used as depth. So there's this relationship between color and the visual impression of depth. And colors have kind of an innate advancing or receding quality. And artists and designers can use this to create the illusion of depth. So you see how those cool colors tend to recede and those warm colors tend to pop. And you can really see it here with the blue seeming like kind of the foggy, dark background, and the red very intense with the tree, making it pop out, almost feeling like it's in the foreground and everything else is in the background. So if think about what would happen if this were reversed. If the tree were blue and the background color were red, this would be a very different painting. So that's kind of a natural atmospheric effect, actually, because uh, if you look at photographs or you go out and look at the ocean at sunset, you'll notice that as you stare off into the distance, the color tends to be more in the cool zone, more blue. And so that's kind of an atmospheric effect of dust in the atmosphere, creating that kind of blue quality in the distance. And so we're used to that in our daily lives as we kind of walk around. And then kind of going to how color is used emotionally, how we associate it with sadness. It can also be very physical, where we feel cooler if we look at blue colors than we do if we look at warm colors. And so this is Georgia O'Keeffe, and just such a beautiful use of color here. So soothing. It just makes you feel cooler and soothed. And this is going to go through a few more of her paintings. They're so amazing with her use of these really cool, beautiful color schemes. This is using a warm color scheme, so you can kind of feel the shift in the emotional sensation here. It feels warmer, it's more agitated. And there you're she's kind of mixing it up with putting the warm colors in the foreground and the cool colors in the background. There's just a little bit of a warm color in this one, and then she has those beautiful blue greens. So when you're starting out with your illustration or your artwork, you tend to want to, even if you're just using simple gray, you want to choose your base color, which is the color that's going to dominate. And then you want to put in your shadows and your highlights. So that's generally how it works with kind of colorization. And that can be really important. So in the Illustrator class, I have students create a portrait and they have to choose their base, they have to choose their highlight, which sometimes is just um, a tint of the base, and then they have to create their shadow, which is sometimes just a shade of the base where they're adding white and black, but sometimes it actually can be a different color or a different hue depending on what kind of illustration you want to create. So color is very emotional and also very cultural. And so we see in this painting, we're kind of agitated by that red, and it almost feels like there's some violent action that might occur at any time. So we tend to associate red with violence, and especially when you pair it next to these soldiers, that's where our mind goes. So it really helps us kind of feel this tension, this agitation, this kind of sense of violence or doom that might occur. So there's definitely emotions of color. So red can really reflect excitement, passion, danger. Blues generally communicate trust, reliability, coolness. Yellow, warmth, cheer, happiness. Oranges, playfulness, warmth, vibrance. Greens, nature, freshness, growth. Purples, royalty, spirituality, dignity. Um, Blacks can be very sophisticated. So as you start to apply color to your logos, you need to go back to kind of the basics of what you're trying to communicate. So do you remember those adjectives that we did last week or the week before? Actually, it was the week before last, when we're trying to figure out what the core values of the company are. That's where you might think about how do you translate those values into a specific color for your logo. And here's just a great example of applying color in a to a painting. So these are all different expressions. As you apply these colors, it really changes the emotional content of the painting and how this kind of signifies all the color range and what the colors are supposed to communicate as you apply them. And so, color is something that we're always thinking about. This is a great use of color to kind of talk about different emotional states of human beings. So, notice that blue is used to communicate depression, and kind of a red, yellow to communicate pride, and anger is also kind of red. And so, anxiety is kind of a combination of the two. So I'm always interested by these schematics done with color associations. So here's a Pablo Picasso painting, feeling very cold here, very lonely, very sad. This is a great use of color to kind of balance the work. So we're just going to go through a few designs here. Then you can see this cool warm color combination. There's a splash of warm in there, but that cool color is definitely communicating something. You can kind of see the agitation on her face. It's almost fear that I see being communicated here. This is just a great example of balance. So it's if you've read The Glass Menagerie, which I had to read it in high school, it's a story of a very kind of lonely, um, depressed girl who kind of falls in love with a man that comes to visit, if I'm remembering it right anyway. But so the warm colors here are in the text, and they really make the text kind of stand out and pop out in the design. And the cool colors are used to communicate that emotion, kind of that sadness and loneliness of the girl in the play. And then if you notice those splashes of white in there, they're being used to kind of balance out the space. So if you didn't have that white moon up in the top corner there, then that area would feel very dark and empty. So just a splash of white up there really creates this balance. But often when you're doing a poster, you might choose to use a complementary color scheme, but you make your graphics one color or maybe an analogous scheme, and then you make your text the complement. So if you totally mix colors in and apply colors to things like the American flag that have definite color associations, then it's going to create this agitation and questioning. So the audience will question, what does this mean to put these colors inside what we know to be red, white, and blue? Why is the designer or artist doing this? And so it instantly creates this kind of questioning and kind of it's a disturbing effect. Once again, color for emphasis, color to communicate something. There was a violent action that occurred, so it's being shown in red here. And if you see the actual painting, that little red splotch of blood there is much more intense than you see in this slide. Uh, Pairing colors with gray and black is really good because you can still get that contrast, that intensity, but then it can be more subtle and more sophisticated. Here's just a great example of the warm colors kind of popping out and looking like they're in the foreground, and the cool colors feeling like they're receding back there and giving this painting a real sense of depth. And this is a great example of kind of cultural significance. So these are obviously military colors. Why are they being applied to this beautiful butterfly that would be more like probably more bright, beautiful colors? And this is kind of pairing a peaceful symbol, a butterfly, with kind of a warlike color scheme, which is interesting and makes us think. So sometimes you can really manipulate and add content by the color scheme that you choose.